All right. Well, thanks for coming today. This is a developer hours called Hello Blocks, an introduction to block development. And I'll just introduce myself real quick. My name is Ryan Welcher. I'm a sponsored contributor by Automatic, and I have been a developer for longer than I care to tell you. And yeah, and I'm really excited to be here and share some information about getting some block development started. And join me is Juanma. I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everybody. Yeah, my name is Juanma. I'm from Spain, but I'm currently living in the UK. And I'm also a full-time contributor to WordPress, sponsored by Automatic. Yeah, we are here to talk a little bit about how to start creating blogs. So, yeah.
Awesome.
Let's go into it.
Cool. Yeah. So just before we get in, we have a couple of announcements. There's a What's New for Developers article on the developer blog for August. So I'll link that down in the chat. And I highly recommend that everyone here subscribe to the developer blog, where you'll get notifications of all the awesome articles that are written mostly by Justin Tadlock, but by many other folks as well. And if you like what you're seeing today, there is a playlist of developer hours recording on the WordPress.org official YouTube channel. So go and hit the subscribe button over there. Cool. So let's get into it. So today we're talking about custom block development. So there's lots of information that you can get out there. Probably the best place to go to get started, if you haven't had a chance, is to go over to the block editor handbook, which I'll link in the chat here. Specifically, there is a getting started section, which maybe I should share. I'll just share my screen. Maybe we'll do that. There's a getting started section. Sorry, bear with me 1 second here. Quick look at what this looks like. So this is the block editor handbook, and now specifically there is the getting started section. Now the getting started section has a ton of information in here, but it's absolutely worth the read. There's a quick start guide where you can go and learn a lot about custom block developments, and there's a tutorial to build your first block. I'm not going to take you through all of this stuff today. We're going to talk about some other things, but this should be your starting point. But before you start developing a block, you should ask the question, do you need a custom block? I know that's kind of counterintuitive to what we're talking about today, but there's a lot of tools and a lot of features and a lot of things that WordPress provides that might negate the need for a custom block. When I first started with block development, my go-to was like, oh, I need to build a thing. I got to go build a custom block. That's not always the case anymore. We have patterns, which are, parts of blocks put together. I have no words for this. I can't explain it. But basically, patterns are a collection of blocks. That's what I'm trying to say. We have templates. We have synced patterns. We have all these other tools that could potentially do what you want to do. We also have block bindings. Block bindings are super powerful, and they're only going to get stronger. So before you build a custom block, see if that's truly what you need. But assuming you're here to learn about custom blocks, because that's literally the name of the thing, we will jump back into the next topic. I'm just going to stop sharing here and take another look. Right. Okay. So we should talk about, I'm going to share again. Sorry. I swear I'm not going to do this all day. I'll share my screen again so you can take a look. So there's a reference document that Juanma and I are going to be referring to throughout the meeting here. I'm just going to drop it in chat if I can find chat.
Yeah, I just shared it.
Oh, perfect. Thanks, Juanma. So, and we're going to look at static or dynamic rendering of a block. So this is a link that you should absolutely go to and read. I don't know, Juanma, if you could drop that in the chat for me, that'd be great. Or if you just did, awesome. So basically, there's two types of blocks. There's a static block and there's a dynamic block. And when we refer to static and dynamic, we refer to the way that they are rendered. So a static block, its markup, the markup that it generates, is written to the database. It's written in the actual database in the post content, and it's available there. Whereas a dynamic block, it Right. Its front end is rendered by PHP sort of on the fly, the way that like old school WordPress would work, where it would take a PHP file and it would render that out and display it as HTML. So there's pros and cons to each. And for a long time, dynamic blocks were sort of a lot of people were building those, and the reason being, and we're going to talk about this a bit later in the troubleshooting section, is that when you're developing a block, you can run into these block validation errors, and those occur when your when the markup that you're generating in the save part that's being written to the database doesn't match what's in your files, and we'll look at the files in a second. But so that can be a real barrier to development, because as you're building this, you're making these changes and you're getting these block validation errors. You have to like take the block out and put a new one in, and so on and so forth. So that's one benefit of the dynamic block, is you don't have to worry about that. The another benefit is that any instance of that block from now to the end of time, it will always get the updates to anything that you make on the PHP side. So if you have a block, let's say that's wrapped in a div, and inside of it you have an H2 tag, and then you want to make that H2 tag an H3 tag for whatever reason, any block instance will automatically inherit that change from now until the end of time, and it's backwards compatible as well. Whereas as a static block, you don't benefit from that. The static block, you'll have to manually go back in and open the block, save it, all that sort of stuff. Problem with a dynamic block is that if you were to turn off the plugin that represents that block, it would no longer render. Whereas in the static block, because it's saved in the database, it will still show on the front end. And there might be some styles missing or something, but for the most part, that content's not lost. Trying to think. I think that's probably the pros and cons for each one. Is there anything that I'm missing off the top of my head? I don't think so, but I would highly recommend reading this to get. I'm sorry, go ahead.
There is a question in the chat about which core blocks are dynamic blocks or static blocks, and I was just answering about the render callback when you register a block, and also the render PHP file that can be used also to define the dynamic render of a block.
Exactly. Lisa's question is a great one. Anything that needs to be retrieved from the database is going to be a dynamic block, because like the query loop block, for example, in your question, that's going to be a dynamic block, because it needs to make a query to the database in order to retrieve that information. And that's like the primary use case for a dynamic block. If you want to see what your latest posts are, you can't save that markup in your database. You have to pull that live every time to get the most recent. So and anything that is like that is going to be a dynamic block. For the most part, this might be a loaded statement, but for the most part, core blocks are static, because they generate markup, and that markup is saved. So unless you're doing something like showing category tag, like you're showing tags, like a tag cloud or something like that, or some of those blocks that need to retrieve from the database, they're going to be most likely static. I think I'll move on from the static dynamic thing, but if there's any more questions, absolutely drop them in chat, because there's a lot to unpack there, especially if this is your first time talking about blocks. And so we're throwing a lot at you all at once. So please ask questions, and we'll do our best to answer them now or after the call.
Yeah, I would like to add that the getting started guide is well shaped to follow that along if you are a complete beginner. So that should be a good start point. And in this session, we are trying to cover a known pain point. So if we go right to the point, sometime is because of that, because we want to cover some things that we already know that have been recurrent pain points.
All right, Elliot, thank you for sharing that link on learn.wordpress.org. That's correct. There's some great information for learning about not only block development, but WordPress development in general over there. So the next thing that I'm going to talk about is a tool that we can use to generate blocks for us. specifically plugins that contain blocks. And it's called, I'm jumping all over the place here, but it's called the Create Block tool. And there is some documentation that you can look at. I'm just going to sort of give you a high level view of it. There's a lot to unpack in there. But what it is, at the end of the day, it's a node package. That's not the window I'm looking for. I'm sorry. It's a node package that allows us to scaffold blocks. So if you were to run it, I'm going to zoom this in. I'm just going to sort of. So what we're going to run is we're going to run npx. So if you're not familiar with npm or npx, I'll give you the Coles Notes version of this. npx allows you to run a node package in place without adding it to your project or doing anything like that. It just downloads it, runs it, and then it goes away. And that's what you're going to want to be doing for this particular package, because we don't need this as part of the as part of our project itself. So create block package. Oh, Cliff's Notes for the Americans. Yeah, sorry. There's a I guess in Canada we have Coles Notes. My bad. So the create block package runs in two modes. It's the first mode is called the interactive mode, which I'm going to demo here. So when I start running this, it's going to ask me eventually, it's going to ask me a series of questions. So I can define the type of block that I want to create. I can do it. I can pick my slug. And it will provide to me a whole lot of details, or sorry, a whole lot of defaults here that I can either accept or not accept. So I'm just going to step through, but basically it allows you to pick a lot of options for this, for the plugin and block that you'll be building. And then that's going to run in the background. It's going to install the scripts package, which provides the build process, which we'll talk about in a minute, and do a number of things. It's doing a bunch of scaffolding. I'm going to just go ahead and cancel that right now. Yes, I want to clear. All right, let's try that. So if I run the same thing again, but I pass what's called the slug, or what I want my my folder name and my block name to be, testing test. That's going to be a thing. This is going to bypass interactive mode, and it's going to just run it all with all of those provided defaults. Personally, I run this mode more than the other one. Now there are flags and there are ways that you can define some of those defaults through the command line tool. And there's even a way that you can do it with an entire template, which is way beyond what we're talking about today, but there is a link to defining templates in the resources file. But either way, I'm going to just clear this out, and I'm going to turn off caps lock because I'm not yelling at anyone. And we're going to look at some files now. So I'm going to get rid of this one and this one. So these are the two testing ones that I built. So I've generated two plugins. The first plugin that we'll look at is the static block plugin. So when your plugin is generated, it generates for you your entry file for your plugin with all of your plugin header information. It gives you README. It gives you your package JSON, which will contain all of your build processes and information about the package. It'll give you a source directory. Your source directory is going to contain all the files that will make up your block. And then there'll be a node modules folder. Node modules is something that you'll never want to put in Git, pro tip there. But it contains all of the packages and everything that you need to run your build process. And then it will contain an actual build directory as well. So the build directory contains all of those compiled files that the build process will generate and output for you. And these are the files that we actually want to use when we're enqueuing our block, when we're adding our block. So the main difference between a static block and a dynamic block is whether or not there is a save.js file. Maybe we should zoom this. Is that zoomed in enough to see that? Yeah, okay, cool. So in a static block, the contents of save.js, this is a JavaScript function, and it's going to return this stuff. And this is the stuff that's going to get written to the database. So whatever the markup is here, that's going to get written to the database. And we'll be talking about block registration in a bit. I'm going very quick, and I know I am, so there'll be questions. So please drop them. Team Sidebar on the right. Yeah, you know it. So a dynamic block differs in that it does not have a save.js, but what it does have is this render.php, and this is a PHP file, and this is the file that handles the rendering of the block on the front end. And You'll notice also, like in the registration call, there's no reference to the save, but there is in static block example. We can go into source here. We can look at index. You can see that we have a little save being imported from our save file. If all of this is new to you from a JavaScript standpoint, sorry, there's a lot of things going on here. So if you're familiar with namespaces in PHP, you can kind of think of an import in sort of the same way. If you want to use a function from another namespace, you kind of do the same from in here, but in this case, we're importing the save function from this file. It's a very loose comparison, and it's technically not accurate at all, but it's conceptually hopefully a parallel for those PHP developers in the room. And so those two dynamic blocks will be rendered where's my here. So they will look like this. You will have basically a rendered block, and then if we look on the front end, we can see that they're both looking exactly the same from a how they're rendered standpoint, but the difference is this is actually rendered inside the content, and this is rendered dynamically by PHP. And we can take a look at what that looks like in the code editor. You'll notice that this is this is that empty paragraph tag. So my static block actually has PHP. I'm sorry, actually has a p tag that's wrapped inside these HTML comments, and these HTML comments are what delineate the blocks from inside of the post content. And for a dynamic block, all we have is this reference. Okay. It's a question about, explain the Vue.js in the source folder and how developers can use JavaScript in the front end and the back end. That's a loaded question. I'll start with the Vue.js. So the Vue.js is a special file that is enqueued on the front end. So if I look at my static block here in the Vue.js, let's make sure it's actually in here. Yeah, that's okay. It's I'm gonna not talk about block.json because Juanma's gonna get into that in pretty heavy depth. But basically, this file is automatically enqueued on the front end. So if we look in the front end of our in here and we go into our console, you can see we've got some JavaScript being we have a console.log being run here, and that comes from that Vue.js. So this is how, if you wanted to have some sort of interaction on the front end, if you wanted to have an on click, or you wanted to have some sort of any JavaScript that you want to run on the front end. I'm going to stop trying to come up with examples because there's like literally a million of them. So any JavaScript that you want to have run on the front end, put inside your Vue.js, and it will be automatically enqueued for you, and enqueued smartly. It won't be enqueued more than once. It'll only be enqueued if the block is there. So there's a lot of things happening behind the scenes that make your life as a developer a lot easier. You don't have to worry about double enqueues or anything like that. That's a great question, Elliot. Thank you.
There's another question from the chat. I think it's interesting. What if I want to create other block in the same plugin in the future?
You absolutely can. Yep, you absolutely can. So by default, and this is there's two main packages that you're going to be working with when you're building blocks. The first package is the create block package, which is what we've looked at. That allows you to scaffold the files. The second one is the scripts package, the WordPress / scripts package. That provides our build process. So it is aware of multi-block in the sense of it knows how to determine if you have more than one block installed. The way that you have to do it, though, is what you will do is inside your source directory, you will create a folder, and we'll call this block one, and we'll put all of our block stuff for there. And then then I'm just going to copy this, and we'll have block, we'll call this block 2, right? And our block 3, why not? And so what'll happen here is this build process will look inside the source directory and say, how many block.json files do I have in here? And we'll talk about block.json in a second, but we've got 1 and we've got 2. Okay, now I know I have to build out 2 blocks. So if I were to start my build process here, and I'm going kind of quick, so if I run the start, it's going to run. Now if I look at my build, now I've got I've got built files for block 1 and for block 3 or block 2 or block 700. You can put as many blocks as you want in there, and you don't have to modify anything inside the build process. And that is a huge win for block developers. That's a great question. Thanks for asking it. And let's just see, where am I in the
Then you would need to also register those extra blocks, right?
Yes, I'm
the
sorry. Yeah,
PHP
then the
side.
final step. Thank you, Mama. That is an excellent point. The final step is making sure that you're registering your block type in PHP by adding the correct folder name, and then we can just add the say. Oh, sorry, 3, not 32, 3. And so this is going to look inside build, look inside block 1, and look for a block.json. And we're talking about registration in a little bit, but and this is going to do the same. So there's no automated way of doing this. You manually have to do this part, but yeah, but it's I mean, we just copied files and move stuff around. There's also a no plugin mode for the create block tool that allow you to scaffold just a block portion. And I would encourage you to go to the docs and read about that and see how that works, because that gives you all the scaffolding magic, and you don't have to copy and paste anything. So it's pretty cool. Yes. So oops, I've lost the docs now. Where am I? Do I not have? There it is. Okay. So we've talked about this. Okay. I'm going to now pass it over to Wanma, and Wanma's going to talk about some really cool stuff. So I'm going to stop sharing. Now let Wanma jump in.
Yeah, okay. Perfect. So there are a few more things to comment about blog development. I'm going to do a quick review of the files that are usually required for a blog. You don't need all of them, but the create blog tool is a good way to scaffold a typical blog, and from there you can remove and add any parts you need. So I'm going to share my screen. Let me see if I'm able to do that. Share, and is desktop one. Yeah. Okay. Can you all see my screen well? Can you see my screen?
I can, yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so yeah, this is an example of a dynamic block. I think I have here the documentation. Yeah, here in Fundamentals of Block Development, there is a page called File Structure of a Block. And here you can see a nice review of all the files that are that can be used for to define a block. So I'm going to do a quick review because I'm going to refer to some of them. So we have the main index PHP file, or the main plugin PHP file, which we usually use to register the blog. You can register a blog in a theme or in a plugin, but they're usually registered via a plugin. So this is the main PHP file of the plugin, and here is where we register the blog via PHP. And I will comment later that we can register blocks in both the server side and the client side, and that's actually the recommended way to go. Like there are some reasons for that I will comment later, but we have here the registration of the block on the server side, and here we have the registration of the block on the client side. So we have the main file for the plugin, and then we have the SRC folder. The SRC folder is important for the build process because, as Ryan mentioned, there is a build process involved that we strongly recommend it because it simplifies the code. It reduces the amount of code to start with, but it also enables a lot of possibilities that you can do with your code. So create block, already scaffold all you need to start developing your blocks with a build process. One of the things that it installs is the scripts package, and there are some scripts here, like the build script or the start script, that by default, without defining anything else, just by installing the scripts package, is going to take everything you have here and is going to create a build folder. There are some other rules, but that's the first thing that is going to look for. And it's going to take the JavaScript files to generate all the bundles that are going to be created in the build folder. And whenever we register the block, an important thing to take into account is that it's going to register everything from this folder. So if you check the PHP file, we can see that we are registering whatever is found in the build folder. Register block type is smart enough to go to the build folder and check any block.json file, and from there register a block. But we can also specify block.json, and there are some other ways that we can register a block. But we get this build folder by running a command such as npm start or npm build. So let me see. I'm going to stop here. I'm right now in this folder. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this. And if I run npm start, block dynamic rendering. Okay, yeah, there, but it's not there. Okay, here we have the build folder. Why cannot see that here? Okay, well, I'll check that later. Well, I continue. We have the build folder that is being generated by the npm start script that is defined here. And some other files that we have are the Vue.js that is going define the JavaScript that's going to be loaded in the front end, some styles files such as style SCSS and index SCSS. We can also load some other SCSS files. Then we have the index file, which is the entry point of all our assets. And then we have the edit.js, which is the React component that we are going to use in the block editor. Okay, so I'm going to run npm start. And if we go, this is block dynamic rendering. We have here the plugin. So if we activate, we should see here the block that we have created, block with dynamic rendering. So here, this output in the editor is what we are seeing here. So if we do this and we npm start is a script that watches for the changes you do in the code, and every time it detects you save those changes, it automatically regenerates the build folder, which is here now. So if we reload here and we add dynamic rendering, we can see here the editor part of our block. Okay, so why am I telling all of this? Because the central point of definition of a block is the block.json. So the block.json is where we define all the things that are required for the block to run. in both the editor side and the front-end side. So there are a lot of properties. Actually, if we go to the block editor, there is a page here that is called metadata in block.json. Here you have the explanation of all the properties, but I'm going to highlight some of them. So we have some metadata properties that we can use to set the title. For example, this title is the one we'll see when we look for the block here in the editor. When the icon description, we can set some properties such as supports or attributes, which I'll explain later. And I'm going to focus on this part because these are the files that are going to be used by the blog in different contexts. So for example, the view script is the property we use to define the path of the file, of the JavaScript file that is going to be loaded in the front end whenever the blog is loaded. So as Ryan showed earlier, there were some console logs by default with create blog. Those console logs belong to this view.js file. So we can define here JavaScript that we want to be executed in the front end when the block appears. Then in the case of dynamic blocks, we can also define a specific file called render.php that will contain the markup that we want to be output by the block in the front end. And here we can use any PHP functions that we want. Like for example, we can add translation, escape HTML characters, and we can access all the PHP functions that we need here. Then we have styles. This is interesting because WP scripts have it's a tool that really simplifies this build process, but you need to know how it works in order to take fully advantage of it. So by default, how it works is that all the CSS files that are imported via JavaScript files are going to be bundled into CSS files. Let me go back a little bit because I want to show something. WP scripts, what it's actually doing is running Webpack in the background. And Webpack is a modern tool to use JavaScript as our central point of organizing the assets of the blog. So with Webpack configure, we can import files in JavaScript and create bundles. So as you can see, we can import SAS images, and with a Webpack process, we generate bundle files. So we can import a bunch of CSS files, and Webpack is going to take care of generating a unique CSS file. So this is an example of this. For example, I think it was here in the edit. In the edit file, I'm importing here index.scss and editor.scss. And because of WP scripts running Webpack, so the default configuration that WP scripts provides take these styles files, and it generates this index CSS. You can see here, this is one file and this is the other file. So in terms of CSS, we have the editor style. So this points to the generated bundled file of CSS. So if we want to use CSS styles with a block, there are two things to take into account. First one is to if we are using a build process, we need to run the build process via npm start or npm run build. We need to generate the CSS, and in order to generate, as we saw here, we need to import those files via JavaScript. So another thing to take into account is we need to import those files in order to generate the bundle. And then in order to enqueue those files in both the editor, the front end, we need to define these properties. So as you can see, loading a CSS file, once you know how it works, is really simple, because we can define here editor CSS. Then here we import the editor CSS. Once we run the build, we generate this file. And in order to get this file enqueued, we just need to add this property here. So that's how it works. And there are two types of CSS files we can load. The editor style, which is going to be loaded in the editor, and the style, which is going to be loaded in both the editor and the front end. And then we have the editor script, which is the main JavaScript file that start the definition of the block. So here is where everything starts for the block. Here we register the block type, we import our edit file, and the edit file is the React component that is run here, because the block editor is a big React application. So in order to run blocks in the block editor, we define specific React components for each block. And that React component is usually defined in a specific file called edit.js. And we add this file as part of the client-side registration of the block. Okay, so that's regarding the block.json. I don't know if there are any questions. I'm going to stop here for a bit just to check if there are some questions.
There's a couple of there's a question about what is the best practice if I want to share logic, code, or styles between the front end and the editor. For example, a CSS rule to make the UI look similar.
Well, I would say that the best recommendation is actually to avoid using custom CSS for your blocks, because as much as you can, you should rely on the block theme nature of WordPress right now. So that should be the first approach. But from there, if there are some styles that you really want to manage via CSS, as I showed here, we have like two types of styles. We have or we generate two types of CSS: style index and index CSS. Style index is going to be loaded, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see, I have here actually the page that explains all of this. Style index is going to be loaded in both the front end and the editor, and the index CSS is going to be loaded only in the editor, which, by the way, this name is not always the same. It depends on the entry point, and those entry points can be customized, because that's another thing that I want to cover. Because WP scripts run in the background Webpack, we can actually customize the Webpack configuration, or even better, we can enhance the default Webpack configuration and add our own rules. I have here an example. So if we go here, the example is in the Google Doc. See. Yeah, this is yeah, as you can see here, we can define a custom Webpack config.js. So if we place a custom Webpack config.js here in the root of the block, it will take that into account. It will use that for the Webpack processes. And here you can see how we can import the default configuration, and we can enhance, and we can add on top of that configuration. So this is very handy in case we want to add more things. But there are a lot of things that can be done by default. So you are covered for a lot of use cases. Okay, I think I have covered all that I wanted to talk about. So I'm going to pass the torch to Ryan because he has more things to tell.
Okay. Just wanted to mention that we are definitely recording this. I've got a couple direct messages from folks. We are definitely recording. It's going to be up on WordPress TV. It's going to be up on the YouTube channel in a little bit. But yeah, so if you have to drop off, no worries. We will definitely have a video recording of this. Okay, cool. So the next part that I was going to talk about was the debugging. So we've talked about all the ways that you can build stuff, but part of the issue is figuring out how to fix it when it's not working. So I'll share my screen here. So let me get sorry. I'm just going to share my screen again. And I have set up a little broken plugin demo. So excuse me. So come with me on a journey, if you will. And I've just scaffolded a block using the create block tool. And now I'm going to start working on it inside the browser. So there's a couple of things. So let's I'm gonna switch this back over. So I have a block that's called debugging. So if I start typing the forward slash, I should start. Oh, I don't see my block. Don't know why, but it's not in there. So there's a couple of places that you can start. The thing that I do, the first thing I always do, and I go into my I go into my inspector controls. Now I'm in Chrome, but every modern browser should have a means of inspecting the sources of the page. The first thing that I check is I look inside of, see if I can zoom this out. I look inside of WP content, inside of plugins, and I look, uh-oh, my block doesn't exist. There's no folder in here that's telling me that I'm enqueuing something from my block. Now, these are the other two blocks, those demo ones, but my block, which is called broken, isn't there. So that tells me that it's not being enqueued. So now I can start thinking backwards and say, okay, well, it's a plugin. So did I enable the plugin? Oh, well, there's a problem. I didn't enable my plugin. So let's enable that plugin, and we'll come back and I'll refresh my page again. And I'm going to just do this. I'm going to look for debugging. Okay, still not in there. So why isn't it in there? Okay, well, the next thing that I tend to look at is did I run the build process? So we can look inside of in here and we can see, well, here's my broken plugin, and I don't have a build directory. So that means that I didn't run my my build process. So I can do that by just like npm run start, or just npm start, because it knows what you're talking about. So if I run that, it's going to build. Now I can say, okay, I've got a build directory. That's good. All right. So now we're getting to the next step, right? Okay. So now if we reload, I'm going to save this. I'm going to reload the page. Now if I look at my sources, I should be able to see content, plugins. Oh, it's still not there. Wonder why it's not there. Okay. So we know that we have the plugin enabled. We know that we've built because we see the files sitting in here. So how do we get our block? How does WordPress know about our block? Well, we look at the registration. So we have to register our block. So let's look in our broken.php, and we'll look down in here and say, oh, look at this. I pointed it to the wrong folder. So let's point it to the build directory where all our stuff actually is. I point this out because I've done this a million times when I've added a second or third or 10th block to a plugin and forgot to update this correctly, or I typoed the build folder. So now I know, okay, so that's pointing to the build where it needs to look for the block.json, and then it's going to know where all these files are. So let's jump back over to the browser. I'm gonna refresh again. Let's look in sources, plugins. Uh-oh, broken build. That looks a lot better. Okay, so I've got that happening. So let's go debugging blocks. There's my, oh no. Now I've got an error. So what do I do with my error? We can look in our console. So this is a scary error. It doesn't help you in any way. So the first place that you should look is in your console, because this is going to be a JavaScript error that gets fired out. Now this error tells you something. Cannot read property of undefined reading test, but this is completely unhelpful to you, because I guess maybe I could click on that and I could see kind of what's going in there. But there is a way to get some slightly better error messaging. In your local environment, if you go into your WP config file, you can add these development constants. So the two that I always use are debug. I always set to true. Debug log, always set to true. If you're like coming from a PHP background and you've worked with WordPress for any length of time, these two would not be new to you. But the one that is really helpful is script debug. So what this is going to do, this is going to help us to get some slightly better error messaging out of JavaScript. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to refresh this now. Block's still going to break because we haven't fixed the problem. But now if I look in the console, you can see I have a much more verbose error messaging. I can see, oh, that's the name of the component. This is the file name with the actual like line number. If I click on that, I can see, oh, I've got some stuff going on in here, right? Now these are intentional errors that I put in, right? So, but this is how we need to do to figure out where we go to find problems, because sometimes you just get this and it's like, I don't even know where to start. So this is where I would start. So now I'm going to go back into my plugin. I'm going to go to my broken, I'm going to go on the source, and we're going to fix that up. So in here, this is wrong. I'm trying to access something that doesn't exist off of something, and it's failing. Well, it's the JavaScript equivalent of failing. So this is another error that you could run into. You get this other error, and the error says this really not so helpful, but more helpful. It says fake function is not a function. So it tells you, okay, well, maybe my import's wrong, or maybe I pulled a component from a place that doesn't exist. So it tries. It definitely tries to help. In my case, I actually imported a function that doesn't exist and tried to use it, which will fail every day, every time. Right. So now I can refresh this and I can say, okay, now my block works. So there's a lot of steps. There's a few pretty common fail points. But as soon as you get to the point of being able to see errors, then that's where things are going to get a lot easier for you. It looks like there's a bunch of stuff in chat, so I don't know if there's anything. Any questions in there? Debugging, you didn't enable the plugin, didn't run. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, there is a question about enhanced core blocks, and yeah, I replied that there are some developer hour sessions that we have dedicated to that.
Yep. Yeah, there's a number of ways that you can do that. There's some filters that you can use to turn off some of the block supports. You can modify. It's easier. It's very easy to add to blocks. It's a little harder to remove from blocks, depending on what you're trying to do. The block supports are getting more and more verbose and robust as we move forward. So it allows you to just filter that and say turn off a whatever, background color for example, right? Cool. So the next thing that you're going to run into is block validation errors. So I'm going to try to set one up for you, and we're going to see what I can do, right? So I'm going to set this up, then I'm going to explain why it's broken. Okay. So now I'm going to refresh this. You see, I'm getting this error. I'm getting this unexpected, or this block contains unexpected or invalid content. Now there's a button here that says attempt block recovery, and if you press that, it'll most likely work. You can press that. Oh, great, it works. I'm going to just refresh, right? But what's happening down here is actually exposed inside of your console log. So this is where you should come and look for that. So what it's telling you here: content generated by save function look like this. and it's got div, class, and it's got h1 with a big change in there. And then finally my broken block works. But what was in the post content, because remember, this is a static block, looks like this. And so Gutenberg, the block editor, is saying, I don't know what you want me to do with these things. These things they don't match what's real, what's not real. What do you want me to do? So this is something that you're going to run into a lot of, especially as you develop. So there's a few ways that you can approach this. The first way is if you're just building this and you're making these changes, just keep clicking this block and then you're good. Basically, you'll save it and it'll be fine. The other thing to keep in mind, and I just want to mention this, is this only applies to blocks that are already inserted. If I add another debugging block, why am I not seeing the thing? Anyways, it's weird that I'm not seeing the H1. Maybe it's hidden. Maybe that's why. Anyways, I should get, let's do this. Oh, this is probably because it's not really a block, but whatever. Anyways, so this is one way of fixing it, but the other way of fixing it is a little bit more complicated, and it involves using deprecations. And so deprecations are defined, updating. Oh, you're right. Thank you, Fernando. Fernando, you should be teaching this. Fernando made an excellent point that I am updating the save. The save only appears on the front end, not in the back end. So if you were to look at this, you should see, sorry, I'm going to refresh this. I'm going to attempt block recovery. I'm going to hit save, and then I'm going to refresh and then see. Now we've got that. So thank you for pointing that out. That is 100% correct. I love how everyone's like, it's not working. Did you do all the steps that you just told me? That's fantastic. Thank you. But you're 100% right. So the edit state and the save state are different files. So if you want to make this change in one, you should make the change in the other. I was just doing this to demonstrate the issue here. So you can define a deprecation in your block, your registered block type. I'm not going to get into it short of just basically pointing this out because there's a lot to it. It involves being able to have an array of states that the block can represent. So as you move forward with this block, you're able to, I don't know, One, if you could drop that into the chat for me. So what it allows you to do is basically say, okay, well, this block did look like this at one point, and now it looks like this. And then so then when the block editor tries to load these blocks, it can look through that list of sort of like old states and say, oh, okay, that's the way. Okay, so this looks like this and it maps to here. Okay, perfect. I can make that work. And it figures it out for you. But I think that's troubleshooting. So that's all I had for troubleshooting. So, I mean, there's about 5 minutes left. So I'd like to maybe open it up to questions, just general questions or what have you. I'll stop sharing and yeah, just leave it there. One, was there anything that you wanted to add that I missed? I kind of went through it fast.
I'm just adding the official documentation about deprecation.
Oh, right, yeah.
But yeah, I think that we have covered a lot of stuff.
Yes, and as always, at a breakneck speed. So I'm sure there's things that maybe we're not as clear.
What we can add is that there is an outreach channel in Slack, in Make WordPress Slack. So in case there are some questions after the session, feel free to reach out to us there because we'll take care of your questions.
Okay, so there's a couple of questions. So Nate Finch is asking, are there any good resources on using the serialized block function? Use case here is migrating from ACF fields to blocks. Just curious. I think I need to understand your use case a bit more. But beyond the sort of the default, so like sort of the documentation around it, I don't have anything off the top of my head. But why don't you can you reach out to me sort of later or after the call? Happy to chat about it though too. Fernando is asking, I find it hard to use any sort of jQuery lib in the backend. If you were to build a slider block and you reach for a library that does not have React version, you'll probably have a bad time. That is a question statement. You're right. You're not going to be able to use any DOM manipulation inside of React because it's a React application. The way that you're going to want to do that is by basically tapping into the React application or adding your own components and dealing with it that way. Depending on what you're trying to do, it's very possible to do what you want to do, but it's just a very different mindset of how things work. For example, I mean, if you're trying to show and hide things, you can probably do it with CSS just as easy. But depending on what you're trying to do. But I would recommend not trying to use jQuery inside the block editor or site editor. But I was going to say something like that.
You know, maybe it's related to that, but I would like to mention that, for example, the HTML API is a good way to manipulate the DOM in the server in case you want to add some elements or you want to look for a specific class. I think that for some cases is the best way to go.
Ivan is asking about using some parts of Gutenberg libraries on the front end, for example, API fetch as a dependency for block. Yeah, you can absolutely do that. The way you're going to want to do that is in your Vue.js, if you import things, you should get added to the dependencies array, I think. But you'll want to, yeah, I use API fetch all the time on the front end. It's such a nice, like super awesome helper function that like knows about all the endpoints and knows what it needs to do. It's a great, DOM ready is also a really good one that I use. It kind of replaces that, what is it? The immediately evoked function expression thing that we used to do when you wrap a function inside of a function and call it immediately. Is that safe for security and access? I think so. I mean, if you're using it safely, you're only going to be able to access the REST endpoints that are publicly accessible anyways. Like if you're not logged in and there's no cookie, there's no way of access, like you're not going to be able to get access to like the options, but you will get access to anything that's publicly available via the REST API. And the other thing too is you don't actually have to bundle it with your plugin. You just have to make sure it's queued on the front end, and WordPress will just give you the library that you need. I think it's totally safe. It actually makes it easier because you don't have to worry about like writing custom endpoints and using Ajax and do all that. It just uses what's there. I think, if I'm understanding what you're trying to do. Anyways, I'm talking a lot. Stop. Okay, well, it's noon, and I don't see any more questions, so just wanted to say thanks everyone for hanging out. And did we do the poll? I don't remember if we actually launched the poll or not.
No, we didn't.
No. Okay.
No.
Should we launch the poll the last second here? All right, I'm gonna go ahead and launch this poll about the intro. Just some questions about block development. If everyone would take a second and fill that out, that'd be awesome. Other than that, thanks so much for joining us. And I don't know, if you have anything you wanted to add.
It's been an absolutely pleasure to talk about this. And yeah, thank you all for being here the whole hour.
Well, maybe we can probably stop the recording. I can do that. Stop recording, and we'll just